Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep into these factorial designs.
Still fun.
Yeah, you sent in unit2.pdf. Looks like you're trying to understand how researchers test like a bunch of variables all at once, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So get ready to break it all down.
I'm ready.
Awesome.
Sounds good. So factorial designs, right? They're like the multitaskers of research. They let you look at how different things like interact with each other instead of in isolation. Kind of like, in real life, you're always dealing with a bunch of factors all at the same time.
Exactly. It's like, when your plants aren't doing well, it's never just one thing, right? Like, is it the sunlight, the soil, the watering?
Right. It's probably all of them.
Yeah. And it's like maybe they're all kind of working together in ways that you wouldn't expect.
Exactly. And that's like where factorial designs are so useful. They help us untangle these complex relationships and see the bigger picture,
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the first step is like, what is a factorial design?
Well, the source material says it's one in which two or more variables or factors are employed in such a way that all the possible combinations of selected values of each variable are used.
Right.
But that's kind of technical, right?
Yeah.
Think of it like exploring all the possible recipes instead of just changing one ingredient at a time.
Okay. So like instead of just changing the oven temperature for a cake, we'd also be changing like the amount of sugar,
Yeah. You got it.
Okay, cool. I'm still a little fuzzy on the like factors and levels though.
Oh, okay. So think about it like being a gardener and you're trying to figure out how to grow the perfect roses. The different types of fertilizer you try, those are your factors.
Okay.
And each fertilizer might come in like different concentrations, like low, medium, or high. Those are your levels.
Okay, so the fertilizer is like the big category and the concentration is the specific variation within that category.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got what a factorial design is. Now, why should we bother with this? What's the advantage?
Well, it's really all about getting a much more realistic and nuanced view of how things actually work in the real world.
Yeah, okay.
So like, instead of just looking at how each individual ingredient affects the cake, it's like, how do they all work together?
Right.
And sometimes those interactions can be like really surprising.
Interesting. So you're saying there's like a difference between the individual effect of something and then how that thing interacts with other things.
Yeah, exactly. We call those main effects and interaction effects.
So main effects is like how each ingredient affects the cake on its own, and then interaction effects are how they all affect each other.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the source makes this really interesting point that if you only focus on those main effects, you might actually miss the bigger picture.
Oh, interesting. So like even if a single ingredient seems to be doing its job, it could be messing with another ingredient in a way that changes everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you can't understand a whole symphony just by listening to each instrument individually, right?
Right.
You got to hear how they all come together.
Yeah, I gotcha. So tell me a little more about those interaction effects then. How do they work in practice?
Well, the source gives this really fascinating example about a cholesterol reduction clinic.
Okay.
And they offered two different types of diets and an exercise program.
Okay.
And they found that both the diet and the exercise, like individually, helped lower cholesterol.
Okay, yeah.
But here's the thing. For people on a specific diet who also exercised, there was like this extra boost in cholesterol reduction.
Wow. So it's not just that diet and the exercise are good. It's that a specific diet paired with exercise did even better than you'd expect.
Exactly. It's like sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
I love that. So interactions, super important. But how do they actually work? What are the different kinds of interactions we can see?
Well, the source talks about three main types: antagonistic, synergistic, and ceiling effect interactions.
Okay, let's hear it. What's an antagonistic interaction?
Okay, so imagine two chefs trying to cook the same dish but with totally different recipes.
Okay.
They might end up with something like totally inedible because their approaches like clash.
So they're working against each other.
Yeah. And the main effects might be really small or even non-existent because they're canceling each other out. But the interaction is significant because it shows this conflict.
Okay, so they're basically sabotaging each other in the kitchen.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. What about synergistic?
This is where the magic happens.
Okay.
So imagine now two chefs who like complement each other perfectly. They create something way more delicious than either one of them could have made alone.
So they're stronger together.
Yes.
Yes.
Their individual skills are great, but the combination like takes it to a whole other level.
I like that analogy. So it's like that cholesterol example. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. What was that third one?
Ceiling effect. So this is like trying to improve on a dish that's already perfect. You can add more ingredients, you can try different techniques, but it's not going to get much better because it's already as good as it can be.
Gotcha. So it's like you've hit a ceiling, you can't go any higher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, depending on the type of interaction, we might see factors working against each other, amplifying each other, or even hitting that ceiling.
Okay, so we can have factors that fight, factors that amplify, and factors that just top out. Makes sense. But how do these different designs, how are they carried out?
Great question. Before we get into actually understanding the data, let's break down how these designs can actually be put into practice.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
So we've laid some groundwork here for understanding factorial designs. Now we got to make sense of, like, the data itself, right? Looking at numbers and graphs and stuff.
Yeah, that can get pretty overwhelming, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like looking at a recipe in a foreign language. You know there's valuable info in there, but you need someone to translate.
For sure.
Think of us as, like, research chefs here to help you break it down.
Yeah.
And the first thing you need to know is the difference between main effects and interaction effects.
Right, yeah.
Remember we talked about, like, judging each singer in a duet individually?
Yeah.
Without considering how well they harmonize together. That's kind of like main effects. It's just the impact of one variable on its own.
Okay, so if we're looking at how well our cake rises, we might look at, like, the baking powder separately from the oven temperature.
Exactly. But then, of course, you know, like, a duet is more than just the sum of its parts.
Right.
You have the interaction effects.
Right.
That's when things get really interesting. It's how those variables combine, how they change each other.
So it's like how well those singers' voices blend together, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And you know how we talked about how those main effects can be kind of misleading?
Yeah.
Well, the source material really emphasizes that if there's a significant interaction, those main effects might not be telling the whole story.
Oh, wow. So even if one ingredient seems to be doing its job, it might be, like, messing with another ingredient and we wouldn't even realize it.
Exactly. And the source uses this, has this great example about deep sea divers.
Okay.
So let's say they do a study and they find that the divers who learned words on the beach had better recall overall.
So, like, the learning location matters.
Right. But hold on. What if there's an interaction effect that shows this only holds true when the recall test also happens on the beach?
Oh, interesting.
What if the divers who learned underwater actually recall better underwater?
Ah, so it's not just the learning location. It's whether it matches the recall location.
Yeah. The interaction effect tells us that it's more about the match than just where they learned in the first place.
Okay, that is super interesting. So the interaction really changes how we interpret the results.
It really does.
Cool. So how do we actually spot these interactions in the data? Do we just, like, eyeball it?
Well, graphs are really helpful for this. The source mentions that in a 2x2 design, non-parallel lines usually indicate an interaction.
Okay.
And if the lines are parallel, that suggests that, you know, they're just additive, no real interaction.
So it's kind of like those choose-your-own-adventure books, right? Like, parallel lines, the story progresses the same way no matter what choice you make. But if those lines cross or diverge, that means your choices really change the outcome.
Yeah. I love that analogy. Of course, you know, things are never perfectly parallel in real life.
Right.
We use statistical tests to see how much those lines deviate and if it's enough to actually be meaningful.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But, you know, most people aren't, like, researchers analyzing data all day.
Right.
So why should we care about understanding all this factorial design stuff?
That's a great question. It's all about being more informed, you know? Like a smarter consumer of information, especially these days when you're constantly bombarded with all this data.
Yeah, totally. So it's like a decoder ring for seeing through misleading headlines and stuff.
Exactly. Like, you know, whether it's a health study or a marketing campaign or like an educational program, you can start asking the right questions.
Okay.
Are they considering potential interactions? Are they overemphasizing the main effects and ignoring those important nuances?
So we can be more critical of the information we're given.
Exactly. And it's not just about scientific research either.
Okay.
These principles, they pop up in all sorts of fields.
Like what?
Well, let's take marketing, for example.
Okay.
You're trying to figure out which advertising strategy works best, right? You could use a factorial design to test out, like, different ad formats, like video versus text versus images.
Okay.
And see how they perform on different platforms, like social media or websites or email.
So it's not just like, is video the best? It's, is video best on this specific platform?
Yeah. You might find that, like, Video ads are generally good, but they're way more effective on social media than, say, email.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. What about other fields?
Well, how about education?
Yeah, education is a big one.
You could look at how different teaching methods work for different types of learners.
Right. So not everyone learns the same way.
Exactly. You might find that, a specific method is amazing for visual learners, but totally flops for auditory learners.
Right.
It's all about those interactions.
Yeah, cool. So we can tailor education more, figure out what works best for each person.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have healthcare. Factorial designs are huge in drug development.
Okay, how so?
They let researchers look at how a drug's effectiveness might be different based on things like age or gender or even someone's genes.
So instead of just saying, like, this drug works, you can be more specific, like, this drug works best for this specific type of person.
Exactly.
Wow, so much more personalized.
Right. So it's all about understanding that complexity.
Okay, yeah.
Moving beyond simple cause and effect. Embracing nuance.
I'm seeing how this, like, interaction effect mindset applies to so many different things.
It really does.
Cool. Can we look at a few more of those real-world applications, like how they're being used to actually solve problems? Welcome back to the deep dive.
It's amazing to think something as, technical as factorial designs can change how we see the world.
It really is. It's like we've been given this this new lens to see those hidden connections.
Totally. Okay, so you mentioned you had some more examples of how these designs are used in the real world.
Oh, yeah. So how about stress? We all experience it, right?
Oh.
But have you ever noticed how well you handle stress depends on what else is going on?
Oh, absolutely. Like if I'm sleep deprived, even little things feel overwhelming.
Right.
But if I'm well rested and I feel like I have support from, friends and family, I can handle way more.
Exactly. And that's something that researchers can study using factorial designs.
Okay.
They can change things like sleep quality or social support and see how those factors interact with stress levels. So it's not just lack of sleep is bad. It's like lack of sleep is really bad if you're also lonely.
Exactly. And then those insights can lead to better interventions.
Okay.
Like think about like a workplace wellness program, right?
Yeah.
If they understand these interactions, they might focus on both encouraging employees to sleep enough and fostering a supportive work environment.
So they're tackling both sides of the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they realize those two things work together,
I see, yeah. So it's more holistic. What about some other examples?
Okay, let's say you're an urban planner trying to improve pedestrian safety.
Okay.
You could use a factorial design to see how different things like speed bumps, interact with pedestrian behavior,
Okay.
which could be influenced by things like street lighting.
Right.
You might find that speed bumps work great in well-lit areas,
Uh,
but not so much in dark areas where drivers can't see pedestrians as well.
right, because then the pedestrians might feel safer and walk out into the street more, even though the cars are still speeding.
Exactly. It's the interaction of those two factors, the speed bumps and the lighting, that's really creating the outcome.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is.
What about environmental conservation? Could these designs be used there?
Oh, definitely. So think about researchers studying like how climate change affects a certain species.
Oh.
They could manipulate things like temperature and food availability
Okay.
to see how those changes, work together to affect survival rates.
Yeah.
And they might find that like higher temperatures alone have a small impact, but when food is also scarce, the effect is way more severe.
Right. So it's not just climate change in isolation. It's how it interacts with all these other things.
Correctly.
Wow, this has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have this new tool for understanding how things work.
I'm glad. It's all about shifting your perspective, recognizing that things are rarely isolated.
Right.
And when you start thinking that way, you start asking better questions.
Yeah. And getting better answers, I guess.
Exactly. And better solutions to problems.
It's like we've unlocked a secret code to understand the world.
That's a great way to put it. And, this is just the beginning. The more you think about factorial designs and interactions, the more you'll see them everywhere.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this.
Of course.
And to everyone listening, thanks for diving deep with us. We hope this has given you a new way to see the world, to understand how things interact, and to ask those insightful questions. Until next time, keep exploring and keep diving deep.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.